What's going on, everybody? Noah from Stage 3 Motorsports here, and as you can guess, since I'm sitting in the shop with a laptop in front of me, we're going to be talking about some Ford news, and the hot topic right now is the new Bronco Raptor. Now, I'm not going to go into every little spec in detail. I'm sure there's going to be some things that I missed, but there's other articles and videos that are full deep dives on this truck and people who've been able to be a little more hands-on with it. So check that out if you're interested, but I just want to share some of my first impressions and general thoughts on the rig. And obviously I wanted an excuse to talk about it, and now's the time. So let's get right into it. Right off the bat, the first thing I want to talk about with this truck is the actual exterior design and styling. And this is what Ford calls the first Ultra 4 inspired off-road SUV package. So you can kind of think King of Hammers. And obviously the Raptor nameplate has always been pretty tightly associated with desert running, Baja 1000 style builds, and high speed off-road. So that's carried through in the overall look. And you can tell that the Bronco is very heavily inspired by a lot of the little design themes that they've created in the F-150 over the years. But one of the first things that's really striking about it is the actual width of the vehicle, because Ford brought this thing out to 85.7 inches wide, which is almost as wide as the F-150 Raptor. And that's crazy given the size of the Bronco overall, because it's quite a bit smaller than the F-150 to start. So I'm impressed that Ford made that much of a difference, and we'll talk about some of the underpinnings later. But what comes with that is obviously a wider look to the fenders, and they did bulge the actual metal bodywork a bit, and then added huge fender flares to the side to cover up those 37-inch tires. They also have, of course, the Raptor style grille with the big Ford block letters across the front. There's some marker lights in there because of the width of the vehicle. And then they made some other changes to things like that front bumper with a bigger bash plate and the silver accents. You've got a different tire carrier in the rear that's been reinforced and has a different third brake light with the markers in that as well. And then there's a couple little Easter eggs and nice touches along the way just to kind of give an homage to the Bronco heritage and kind of the Raptor name along the way. Now, a couple of things I really like about the styling on the Bronco are firstly the amber DRLs in the headlights. It's still generally the same headlight design as the regular Bronco if you do the higher spec LED package and not the entry-level LEDs, but because it has the full amber ring and bar through it, I just think it looks a little sportier and certainly ties in well with the amber markers that are in the front. I also really like the new hood design with the functional heat extractors and the extractors in the fenders. It's cool that they are truly functional, that they work, but I think it also looks good and adds to that Baja flair and sort of sets this apart from a regular Bronco package. So it's a really cool design. The regular hood is pretty simplistic anyway, so this certainly adds a little more visual depth and some flair to it. I'm also really digging the new front bash plate design with that sort of modified modular bumper they've got going on. It's very similar, obviously, in design to the regular modular bumper on the Bronco, but I think it ties together really well, and having the big silver bash plate just kind of immediately gives you that pre-runner Baja look. It's also a practical upgrade. It's not like they just put a piece of plastic on there for looks. They fully committed, which is the neat thing about the Raptor, is all of this stuff does seem to have a bit of a purpose in how the Bronco operates. With that being said, there are a few things about the Bronco Raptor's design that I don't love, and one of the first things is actually the fenders on it. I think Ford should have brought the metal part of the fender out further and kind of bulged it so it looks more like an aftermarket fiberglass flare, and then did a little bit of a thinner flare on the outside of that was black instead of having massive black flares added onto the regular fenders. It's just a weird style. It kind of makes me think of some of the Arctic truck like Hiluxes and Land Cruisers that are designed for snowy tundras. It's functional, and obviously Ford had a bit to deal with to try and make this street legal at that kind of width, but I just think that they could have maybe cleaned that design up a little bit. The other thing is the Ford logo grille, or the Ford letter grille, is not my favorite design on this truck. It definitely matches the Raptor aesthetic, but I actually prefer the Bronco lettering and more of the standard Bronco grille options that you can get in the regular packages. I just think it looks better and is a little more classy, but it's to each their own, you know. All of this design stuff is kind of beauty in the eye of the beholder, and I know there's going to be some things that people really like and dislike and will agree and disagree with me, which is perfectly fine. That's just part of how it goes. But overall, I think Ford pretty well nailed it, and this is going to be a vehicle that a lot of folks like and are going to want as sort of a pinup poster rig in their room or as a wallpaper on their computer, and for good reason. All right, so next up, let's talk about kind of the main party piece of the Raptor and what makes this thing really stand out from the rest of the line, and that's going to be the suspension and the overall frame, wheel and tire setup, because obviously off-road capability is what defines this nameplate, and they didn't hold back on the Bronco Raptor. They made a lot more changes than I expected them to, especially given the capability of of the Bronco and some of the higher trim levels and with Sasquatch package, they still went in and tweaked a lot to make this truck significantly better for high-speed off-road use. Right off the bat, it's got the full Fox live valve treatment that you've seen in the F-150 Raptor. So we're talking 3.1-inch shock bodies, which are huge, with custom designed springs with the proper rates for this vehicle, tuned specifically to run at higher speeds in the desert. And then because it's live valve, you can make adjustments on the fly to get it to ride firmer or softer or however you want for the way that you're using the truck. Then obviously this also provides a bit of lift to accommodate a full 37-inch tire. And what we've been seeing here on the Raptor they show is basically a 37-12-50-17, and it's a BF Goodrich KO2. So that fits pretty well in line with what they've done on the other Raptors. It's a great tire. I love the KO2, so I think that's an excellent choice, and I'm sure that's what these will end up with once they actually hit the lot. But it looks good. The 17-inch wheel is awesome. I'm always a fan of more sidewall as opposed to a larger 18 or 20-inch rim, and it gives you the ability to truly air down and run this thing hard. I think an 18 or a 20 kind of would have been nonsense on a Raptor, and it doesn't really fit in line with what they were going for anyways. So that looks great. And then it also has a full-size spare on the back. So Ford did a new reinforcement bracket to kind of stiffen up that rear gate so that way it can handle the weight of that tire and the force of it moving up and down as you're just ramming this thing through the desert. And I'm really happy to see that they did this. I hope that actually becomes an aftermarket part that people can buy, because one of the big issues in jumping up to 35s or especially 37s on the regular Bronco is that you typically have to buy a reinforcement or a relocation bracket to do it. And I think a Ford Performance bracket is probably going to be a little bit cleaner, better fitting, and longer lasting than a rough country bracket will be. So we'll see if that makes it to market. I would be surprised if Ford didn't offer it, but it's a nice touch and obviously helps keep the functionality of this truck true to form, because if you're out running this thing and you blow a tire, you're not going to want to put a donut on there, and it's not going to get you back out of the desert on a donut either. So tying in with the new suspension, Ford made some other significant changes to the frame and the body of the vehicle to reinforce it and allow it to have larger travel and obviously the wider track width that it has. So you're getting 13 inches of travel up front and 14 in the rear. And then they've changed things such as the actual coilover mounts on the frame. They've added new bump stops. They've adjusted the upper control arms. Everything has changed. There's actually some neat shots where you can see the frame off version of the Bronco with all the stuff that Ford has changed in blue and yellow. And it is surprising how much time they put into engineering this thing to really beef it up and make it sturdy enough that you could actually go out and jump it just right off the lot or run through the desert at 60, 70 miles an hour, whatever it may be. So a lot of that is really cool to see. Another interesting thing is that with beefing up the frame, they've also increased the towing capacity of the truck up to 4,500 pounds, whereas the regular Bronco is around 3,500, I believe. And then they added some braces across the pillars. So you have one basically behind your head on the B pillar inside the cab, and then one on the C pillar in the very back to kind of reduce the flex in the truck and keep it from buckling or bending as you're really wheeling this thing. And overall, the gearing is pretty similar or almost exactly the same, I think, to what the regular Bronco has, but they tried to beef up the axles and equipment to accommodate the additional abuse that this truck's going to take. So once again, it's neat to see that Ford is taking this seriously. An interesting side note to all these changes that Ford has made, it seems like the Bronco Raptor is only going to be available as a four-door option, which actually makes a lot of sense. And I know it'll frustrate some people because the two-door Bronco looks so good, and a lot of us like the capability and functionality of the two-door as far as a trail rig is concerned, but really it is understandable why Ford wouldn't follow through on that, because the two-door does make sense if you really like rock crawling and tight technical terrain and you're just doing actual trails as opposed to wanting to do high-speed desert running, where that longer wheelbase provides quite a bit more additional stability and makes the truck a lot more controllable and drivable if you're trying to slide it around in the dirt or, you know, bomb over whoops or whatever it may be. I do see why Ford has gone that way, and I think that the four-door still looks good and it still makes sense for this package, but as a whole, this truck's probably going to be a blast to drive. I mentioned it a little bit earlier, I know, but just in the footage watching people run these things, it looks like a good time. I hope that one day I will be able to drive it. I've had the privilege of running both a first gen and a second gen Raptor off-road pretty aggressively, and they are a total blast. So whether you like the Bronco or not, it's hard to argue with the fun factor of a vehicle like this, and especially with the time they put into the Fox suspension and everything else, I'm sure this is going to ride significantly better than your bare bones base model Bronco right off the lot. I mean, we did a full review testing our little blue Bronco and running it around in Sedona, and I did like it, but it was pretty clear that it would not be able to tackle the same terrain that the Raptor version would be able to handle. So you're certainly still getting some amount of bang for your buck, even though these trucks are going to be ridiculously expensive after dealership markups are put into place. So let's get into the real spicy stuff here, which is to say powertrain, and more specifically the motor that's in this rig, because I know that this is a sensitive topic for a lot of folks because everybody wants a V8, and I do get it to an extent. I understand. I've talked about this in other videos. The V8 is a lot more fun and just has more of a raw feel, and certainly the sound and just the experience of driving a V8 is typically a lot better than a V6, even with turbos. And I really love the 6.2 in the original Gen 1 Raptor. So I get why people want that, but if you just come in close here real quick, we all knew Ford wasn't going to do a V8 in this truck, right? Like the way they've been running things, it was pretty much dead set it's going to be an EcoBoost. The part that's surprising, though, is that it isn't just a modified or tuned version of the 2.7. It's actually a completely different motor. So the Bronco now, as the Raptor package is set up, will have the 3-liter V6 that's also a twin turbo. It's basically the same motor that was in the Explorer ST, but they've tuned it a bit differently and obviously accommodated it to fit in the Bronco's engine bay. So it's going to supposedly make 400 horse. They haven't released exact numbers yet. That's a ton of horsepower, especially given the size of these trucks. I get that things have gotten quite a bit heavier with safety tech and airbags, and obviously just reinforcing it and running 37s kind of changes the dynamics of a vehicle, but still a Bronco with 400 horse that you can buy from factory that way, that's twin turbo and has anti-lag, is pretty crazy. I don't think this was really a misstep. I think it makes a lot of sense for the way Ford wants to run it, and I know people are still going to be angry that there wasn't a V8, and that's fine. It makes sense for how Ford is putting vehicles together, and realistically, I don't know that there's much to complain about here anyways, because they're still creating a vehicle that's truly off-road focused and is pretty wild given the time that we live in. This is something that's very different from an all-electric or a hybrid vehicle that's just designed for fuel economy and has to meet certain EPA regulations. I mean, they have a little bit of that influencing the Bronco, but we should probably be thankful that we're getting these really off-road focused rigs, and if people keep buying them, whether they use them as mall crawlers or not, it just continues to push the market and keep it open for those of us that want used rigs down the road, or to, continue to encourage Ford to keep producing sweet off-road trucks and not just moving straight back into making the Fiesta or the Taurus or whatever else. Another thing I wanted to touch on real quick here while talking powertrain is the exhaust as well. Ford has been putting a lot of time into their exhaust now that they've committed to EcoBoost engines, because that is one of the big drawbacks, is that these V6s just don't sound good. They don't have a good exhaust note, and I've always thought the 3.5 has sounded pretty terrible, but they've been working on new ways of kind of redirecting sound and bending the tubes and doing equal length exhaust on both sides to sort of fix that sound or make it slightly more tolerable. And so it seems like they've done a lot of that work here on the Bronco, and they've also added the adjustable valves, so you can go to basically like a quiet or a medium like sport sound, or full on loud, just in your face Baja off-road kind of sound. So I don't know what that will really sound like in person. It's always hard to get a sense for that just hearing it through your computer or through your headphones, but it is cool that you have those options that you can kind of shut it up if you don't really want to hear the noise. But I like that Ford's taking it seriously, and they still want to give you the experience of having a motor that hopefully sounds pretty decent and feels fun to drive. The other thing about the exhaust is that they also brought up those dual tips and kind of tucked them behind the bumper, so they're downturned at the end, but they don't really stick out to where you can see them, which is really practical because it doesn't become an area where you just hang up and drag them over rocks. And the Bronco's already got a pretty steep departure angle overall. Certainly with this wheel and tire setup and the suspension that's on there, it's probably not going to be a huge issue for most people. But I know personally, like with my 4Runner and some of the other pickups like the Ranger and the F-150, you can pretty often end up crunching the exhaust and dragging it over rocks as you're trying to clear things on a trail. And it may not break anything, but it does certainly do some damage, and it doesn't feel great to have that stuff dragging behind you. So I like the practicality that Ford did there. Instead of just putting a big shiny chrome tip on there that says Raptor or something on it, it still really makes sense for the purpose that they're aiming for. So as we're winding down towards the end here, let's talk a little bit about the interior and some of the tech, and then a couple of the other little features and things that I didn't mention earlier on. So moving inside, obviously Ford still completely committed to updating the interior and giving it the full Raptor treatment. So one of the first things that sticks out to me is the new seats, which look great. They've got different bolstering. They're quite a bit more aggressively styled. It's different from what you get in your regular Bronco, and it's designed obviously for running the truck a little harder and a little faster. It's pretty cool because you can do either a regular vinyl seat that still has all the same bolstering and everything, but is easier to clean and wash out, or you can go to the suede with those code orange accents, and it ties in a little more with the styling of the Raptor on the inside, but also looks really comfortable and very sporty. So I'm sure a lot of folks will probably go for the suede. I get why you would like that, but if you wanted to really use your Raptor like a Raptor and pull the doors off and the roof off, and you're concerned about being able to clean the seats and everything, then you have that option to stick with the vinyl. And they also will allow you to keep rubber floors in there unless you want to upgrade and add carpet in. So I'm glad to see those options. I don't know that a lot of folks will necessarily hose out their Raptor from the inside or run it that hard to where the interior is getting caked in dirt and mud. But for the couple that really do use it, I think that that's an awesome option to have. But overall, the interior design is really solid. There's lots of other orange accents. They beefed up the steering wheel. It's a little chunkier. You've got paddle shifters in there, and you get, of course, the large full 12-inch touchscreen, which is just insane looking in the dash to me. It's so much screen real estate in such a small flat dash, but definitely cool features that you would expect in a truck of this trim level. And one other small thing I noticed is that it seems like the all digital gauge cluster display is a bit different from the display that you get in the regular Bronco. And instead of just adding some orange accents to that, they kind of changed the layout and how the gauges read. And it looks like it's got more of a traditional tack, which this might sound silly, but I think some of you guys will know what I'm talking about. The vertical, like thermometer style tack thing that they have in the regular Bronco is not great. Especially if you have a manual like our little black diamond blue Bronco does, the vertical tack just doesn't speak to me. It's not great, and it's not like you're staring at it constantly as you're shifting, but the more traditional style tack is nice to see, and hopefully that gets carried over into some future iterations of the Bronco down the road. Some other little things that I kind of alluded to or mentioned briefly before, but I wanted to touch on again, are the full skid plate setup and the bash plate on this truck. It's really well protected underneath from what I can tell. It looks like they've got obviously the big silver bash plate on the front to guard the motor and the intercooler and everything else, but then you're still getting a full engine skid, transmission skid, and it looks like they've got something for the transfer case as well. So it's going to be well protected underneath, especially if you do actually want to rock crawl this truck a bit and aren't just doing high speed off-road over the sand. Then a lot of peace of mind comes from that. I'm a big fan of having skids on a vehicle because sometimes that stuff is just unpredictable, and you get into really technical terrain where no matter how good your line is, you're going to end up dragging and scraping. So really glad to see that. It looks good. It's tied in. It makes sense for this truck. And then the other thing is that the big fender flares that they added on this, I guess we're having some issues in the back of really picking up a lot of rock chips and damage because the tires kick up so much debris when you're running this thing. So they made the front sections of those fenders replaceable. It's like a rubberized plastic or something in there that's kind of meant to mitigate damage, but it can be popped off without replacing the whole flare, which is pretty neat. I think it's a decent solution because that stuff's going to get abused no matter what, and if people are really using them, I think they're probably going to want to replace that at one point or another, especially if they pick up a larger rock or something that cracks it or damages that little plate. So we'll see how that turns out down the road, but there's some more good attention to detail there. The last little detail I'll mention here is the fog light setup that comes on this truck. And the two innermost lights are designed to be regular LED fogs that are functional and street legal. And then the two outers are actually off-road LEDs just built in and ready to go from factory, which is pretty sweet. So they come with covers on them. That way you can run it on the road. It's not an issue. And then once you hit the dirt, pop them off and you're good to go. And a lot of folks end up adding LEDs down the road anyways, but it's cool that they're using rigid equipment, which is pretty good quality and has really nice output, and it's already designed to work in those pockets, so you don't end up with silly brackets or people just screwing on self-tapped eBay lights and ramming things through body panels. It's a lot cleaner, a lot more flush with the design of the bumper. So just a nice little touch and kind of a cherry on top, I guess, with all the rest of the design and features that are tied into this rig. So folks, that's going to be a wrap on this video, and I appreciate it if you stuck it out to the end and listened all the way through. Definitely leave me a comment down below. Let me know what you think of the Bronco Raptor, what you like, what you dislike about it. I definitely want to hear your guys' thoughts and your opinions. We can chit chat a little bit. I'm sure there's going to be some very vocal people who have some very strong opinions about this rig, but overall I think a lot of folks are going to like it, and certainly the idea is cool even if it's way out of most of our price ranges. So let me know. But also, I said this at the beginning, if there's specs and details I didn't cover, I'm well aware of it, but there's some other articles you guys can check out that really do deep dives on this rig, and you can get all that info that you need. And with that being said, as always, thank you guys for watching, and I will see you next time.